Hello, fabulous listeners. Thanks for tuning in to Old Bodies Outside. This is your host, Brian Peterson. This episode's guest is Michael Jospé. He is the founder and CEO of the Earth-Based Institute, which is a global leadership development organization dedicated to supporting personal growth and discovery and to helping people with nature connection. Michael, it's great to have you on Old Bodies Outside.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I really appreciate you inviting me here.
Yeah, I was trying to think back how I came across the Earth-Based Institute, and I think that I earlier this spring I was reading one of Dr. Joe Dispenza's books, um, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and I think I was thinking about that book, but also thinking about nature, and somehow I scrolled across the Earth-Based Institute, saw that you were
Oh,
the
that's cool.
founder and CEO, and I was like, gosh, like Michael's up to some great stuff.
Well, that's neat that you put those two together because that's exactly, the combination of thinking that was going on in my mind when I started EBI.
Okay, nice. Well, we need to thank my wife then, because my wife passed me that book. She had read it twice, and I didn't even know that she had read it twice, and she passed it to me and said, "Brian, you're a little stressed. Why don't
Yeah.
you read Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself?" And it was profound for me. It
Yeah.
really was.
Yeah. Well, we encourage all of our students to read it too because I think it really it's got some really important steps in it for sure. Really important pieces of information for people to wrap their head around in terms of what change really means.
And it empowered me too. Like I didn't know I had the power to change myself like that.
Mm, yeah, right on.
So why don't we jump into our conversation about when we're going to go by EBI after this, the Earth Based Institute, or we can say Earth Based Institute. But I wanted to hear about how did you enter into the field of personal growth and nature connection that kind of ended up being the foundation for the Earth Based Institute?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think really for me, it really began when I graduated high school. And I had the opportunity, before I started to go to college, I had the opportunity to do a NOLS course through the NOLS is the National Outdoor Leadership School. And I did a 30-day backpacking trip in Alaska.
Wow.
And it was really the first time I had ever done anything like that in my life. I had had some nature and wilderness type experiences and so forth, but I wasn't. I hadn't really dove into any kind of self discovery very much. Was had a difficult upbringing, and so nature started to become a place of self-reflection for me. But on this um, Knowles course, I didn't really realize the impact that being in the wilderness had until I got back home from that experience after 30 days of being in the wilderness. It was like all my senses were turned on. It was like I looked at myself in a totally different way. People saw me in a different way. I just felt different all around. And at 18 or 17 years old, I was like, what the heck happened out there in the wilderness that would cause that? What would cause my shift like that in my perceptions? And I became really interested in that. And I actually became even more interested in it as when I started to lose that state, when that started to kind of fade out, that even became even more curious to me of like, well, how come I'm going back into my old way of being, you know? And, um, I've started to learn that there's this concept called the wilderness high, that after about 72 hours of being out in the wilderness, in a wilderness location like that, your nervous system starts to entrain with that environment. So you you know, begin to almost, create a slower brainwave frequency that is more harmonious to the environment that you're in like that. It's not it's not something that you are, totally in control of unless you're aware of it. Your nervous system is just going to harmonize like that to whatever environment you're in. And so just being out, right? The Knowles experience is not a therapeutic kind of experience, at least when I did it. There was no like, hey, how are you feeling today about your experience? And there's no processing that would happen around these experiences other than teaching you leadership type skills, right? So all of these changes were happening kind of under the radar, not in any sort of facilitated way. And that was really fascinating to me as I started to dig more into this process of self-discovery and consciousness and all of that kind of stuff, which became a huge passion for me. But um, the questions that I really started to ask was like, how can we? Is there any way that we can harness that change that happens in the wilderness? Like, can we accelerate it in some way? Do we have to wait for 72 hours for that to happen? Right? Can we move that state of connection quicker? Can we choose that whenever we want? That kind of thing. Um, and then how do we work with that integration of a big event like that? It doesn't just have to be nature, but it could be, I mean, some of my first clients were teenagers or young adults that had something significant like that happen, a Knowles course or wilderness therapy or world travel or something like that, where they came home and their minds were blown, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I'm a different person now. So how do we integrate that into the life that hasn't changed while you were gone, right? Like, you've changed, but everyone else is still the same,
Right.
since you were gone. And that's exactly what I experienced when I came back from Knowles. All my friends were doing the same thing. My family's dynamic was the same, but I felt totally different. And I didn't have any support in how to integrate that back into my life. So that became something that was really important to me. Um, and then uh, you know, in and out of college for a while, and started to connect and really fall in love with the teachings of Tom Brown Jr. From the Tracker School. And he wrote a book called The Tracker back in the early 70s. And when I read that book, it was a story of his childhood and being mentored by an Apache scout, an Apache, a scout. You can think of stories. It's not quite the same, but you can think of stories of like Geronimo or something like that, where an Apache scout was an incredibly highly aware, um, connected individual to nature, very self-sufficient, master in wilderness survival, master in tracking and living closely with the earth on kind of all levels: physical, mental, spiritual. And I became, when I was about 19 years old, I started really digging into that. Was what I wanted to really learn and really understand. And I still to this day study with Tom. And so he's a huge influence in my life. And one of his students is a man by the name of John Young, who's also a pretty well-known educator in this world of nature connection. In fact, John wrote a book called The Coyote's Guide to Nature Connection that is really, an accumulation of trying to deeply understand how Tom Brown taught him to be so deeply connected to nature. How did Tom learn from his teacher, Stalking Wolf? And how do indigenous communities in general create a deep state of nature connection within their communities? And so um, John's work is fascinating. He's a wonderful teacher, and I got to spend some time with John and really dig into understanding nature awareness and nature and animal tracking and so forth with him. Um, but these men, these influences on my life, really. started to show me that there was a deeper relationship, a deeper communication that was happening with nature that was natural. This was something that was like it was the way that I discovered it or was taught it was like, this is your birthright. This is how to walk in relationship with nature. And, um, and so doing that, you're connected on all levels. You're connected on an emotional level. You're processing, you're thinking about your life, how to be a better person on this planet, how to have more influence and inspire people to be connected to nature, to be connected to themselves, to be in better relationships with themselves, relationships with the environment. So that was a fundamental background for me. And when I decided to go back to college, I went to college at the University Western State Colorado University. It wasn't a university at the time, in Gunnison, Colorado. And I get my degree in outdoor recreation leadership. So I was learning again, like how to take people into the wilderness, like how do you take them backpacking, rafting, backcountry skiing, wonderful stuff. Loved it. Like I couldn't believe there was a degree in that I could go to school for that. That was the greatest thing. Um, but again, nobody was talking about what was actually happening to you through those events. Like it was clear to me that as my friend was rock climbing, he was going through a process in his mind. There was something about that climb that was directly related to his whatever was going on in his life. He was working something out on that rock. Or there was something about the river and the effect that the river would have on a group or an individual that we it wasn't really explored in the depth that I was really curious about, and was kind of like shown through Tom and John. Was like, there's a deeper communication that's happening here, and all you got to do is kind of turn that switch on and be in that state of conversation. You're going to learn a tremendous amount. You're going to grow and you're going to heal through that. And and that really started to kind of, I made these connections around adventure and adventure experiences and personal transformation like that, and started to really see that one of the one of the biggest needs that I see in humanity is healing ourselves, is healing trauma, healing our relationship to ourselves, healing our relationship to each other, and healing our relationship to the earth. And so that became like my purpose, really my vision, my mission is to support that in folks, support that relationship to self, relationship to nature, and relationship to others. um, and so ended up going to graduate school to really study how to do that, and developed a model for that kind of work with folks, and started primarily working with, like I mentioned before, people having these major transitional experiences in their life and helping them integrate it into their life. That was kind of my first wave of kind of coaching work, if you will. Um, and I was also teaching courses for Western State, and I was also teaching for Naropa University as they were starting their wilderness therapy master's degree. I was part of helping them put together that original curriculum for integrating these wilderness environments into the therapy that the students were learning to be able to do, the clinical therapy. And during all of that time, I started to see that there was a pretty clear difference between the clinical therapy that I was working within at Naropa, not as a clinical therapist, but seeing that training and that model was very different from the way that I was approaching nature. For me, there's a big difference between sitting under a tree and talking about your life, which in and of itself has amazing potential because of just the effect nature has on us. But there's a big difference between that and inviting that tree to be part of that experience with you, where that tree has meaning and message and information for you within that process that you're going in. So this more collaboration with the environment. And so all of these different experiences really kind of inspired me to say, I need to start my own thing here. And um, I had a group of students that I was training and teaching through Western State and some through the Naropa. And they were asking me, will you teach me to do what you do? Because I was working with these individuals who were coming out of these programs. I was taking clients out into the wilderness for extended transformational experiences. And this group of students were like, this for me is the work that I want to be doing. Will you teach me how to do that? And so I at that point, started to create um, the Nature Connected Coaching program. So 2004, I started an Earth-Based Institute and was primarily coaching. Over that course of time, I was also teaching different courses and so forth. And then 2008, I started training people more specifically in this kind of work, which I call Nature Connected Coaching. And it's accredited by both Western, you can get college credits or graduate level credits if you work with Western through that, but also it's accredited with the International Coach Federation. So it's a professional training, and you get a certification from Earth-Based Institute, but you also are eligible, and your certification includes a international professional credential as a professional certified coach. So that's that's the history. That's how I got into it, and that's where I am right now.
That's just amazing, Michael. There's so many tidbits on your explanation that really resonated with me. And one of the things that I really like how you have a way of turning your curiosity into a very specific, concise question that you can then tackle. And it seems like that's really helped with expanding and developing the Earth-Based Institute. And so earlier on in your explanation, you're giving questions about like, how do I harness nature? How do I harness nature? And leading to like, how do we collaborate with this tree? Like that was such a cool piece of your explanation. And hearing about you going off to Knowles as a youngster. My stepson just got back 2 days ago from a month-long wilderness camp in the Boundary Waters Wilderness up in northern
Oh
Minnesota, and
wow.
he canoed into Canada. And so he is going into sixth
Mm.
grade next year. So he is starting to experience a lot of
Oh
this
wow.
stuff. And he's starting to experience that
Yeah.
re-entry, and that re-entry effect that you talked
Yeah.
about. That is not an isolated thing. I have talked about that with so many people. In fact, I had a prior guest on the podcast, this gentleman named Gordon Hempton. He wrote the book One Square Inch of Silence, and he talked about how he took someone with him to go record the soundscape in the Amazon. And so he was saying the
Oh, I've heard about this
Amazon.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he's famous. Like he's won an Emmy for his recordings. Like he's been doing
Yeah.
it for over 4 decades too. He's really just a great guy and huge wealth of knowledge.
Wow.
But he talked about, and kind of lightly put terms, that it's not so much about the Amazon, which is exciting to go to the Amazon, but what about the Amazon? So like the emphasis on off when you go and re-entry
Right.
back into nature or back into the city, like you mentioned, like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like I have felt profound changes in myself, a lot of this intangible stuff, but I'm not seeing it with my family. And so those questions that you brought up earlier in your explanation, that was also strongly resonating with me. And I was also thinking about how you mentioned, after so long in nature, you really start to feel these effects. And I think I've also come across that with maybe in Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. I think he talked about like it takes him a number of days where he's been out in the wilderness where he's really starting to feel the
Mm.
effects of it. And so, anyways, one of your questions, how do you harness that? Gosh, I've never had that question before. What a great question to ask yourself, and then to
Yeah.
pursue and to help other people with that.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah. I think about, you mentioned your stepson, and me going into the wilderness at 17 in 1992 or something like that, you know, um, totally different experience than a teenager or a tween going into the wilderness now. I
Yeah.
mean, the dependency on technology, on phones, on social media, all that kind of stuff. I that's another really interesting question right there. Is I would love to dig into talking to folks on at programs like that to see how long it takes for that to kind of unravel for people before they can really drop in. Does that make it longer? Does it make it, 82 hours or something like that instead of 72? Or is it
Yeah.
still the same, kind of consistency? My son, this week, I'm taking him to a 2 week long wilderness camp, very similar here in Colorado. And, I'm curious to see how he does, how he, withdrawals, so to speak, and detaches from, you know, the dependency on technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
think that's got to have some sort of effect.
I think so. I'm sure with both camps, I know with my stepson's camp, immediately upon arrival, they have to turn in their cell phones. They're allowed to have it on the bus drive up
Yeah,
to, kind of text family and say, won't be talking. He left for a
yeah,
month, so I won't be talking to you for a month. But I think you're absolutely right. Like with technology comes different aspects, differences in generations, right? There's different access
yeah,
to technology and whatnot. And that affects our experiences and something that's really interesting to explore and to study too. So that's another great question that
yeah,
you
yeah,
posed.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that, well, you asked about like how do is it possible to enhance that for people, that connection to nature? Can you accelerate it? Can you bring people into that place quicker? And I really do think that um, practices like nature awareness type practices, meditations on your senses, where you are making the conscious decision to observe nature, and as opposed to just sit outside in nature, right? There's that difference again of I can just be outside sitting under this tree versus I'm going to be in connection, I'm going to be in relationship. And the doorway into that with nature is through observation. So getting out of all of your thinking and processing mind, and observing, noticing what's happening with the wind, what's happening with the birds, what's going on around you. That is a really sacred question to be asking, of what is happening right now in my environment. And the more you ask that, the more you bring yourself into that question, the quicker you start to drop into that place of connection. And I don't have any like data on that in regards to like, are there brainwave frequency changes and so forth that quickly. I would love to be that sophisticated in my work with my students here, but um, just seeing people drop into that state, right? And it's a very similar experience, very similar type of feeling that I was having, was being able to get into that. Now, if you can get into that, if you can make it a practice for yourself to get into that state, for 15, 20 minutes a day, once or twice a day, how does that compound into your life, and how does that start to have an effect over a longer period of time in your life? How does it shift your nervous system, your relationship to nature, or your relationship to yourself? And I think we see this very similar kind of practices in all sorts of different cultures too. you know just that idea of taking sacred time for yourself on a regular basis, of reflecting, of connecting. But in this case, it's taking that time to connect with nature, connect with yourself, to open up your senses, to open up your awareness, and feel. And that's another kind of inroad right there, is sensation and feeling, not so much emotion, but sensation and feeling. And, you know, is a tough, another tough barrier or kind of roadblock for people to get over and around, is to drop into a place of allowing themselves to feel something with nature. What are you feeling? And not having that become a major disturbance that takes you out of your place of connection, but then more into thinking and processing and so forth around what's going on. So there's time for both of those, but I really feel that you know practicing those skills of nature awareness um, can take you there really quickly.
And I think, like you mentioned, over the long term, doing it consistently, once or twice a day, seems like, yeah, you can really have that, boosted nature awareness. It sounds like from what you're describing, I know you said you don't have objective evidence, and I don't know why you would, but it sure sounds like you're getting to a different type of brainwave for sure, something like maybe an alpha state.
Yeah, that's what I'm. That's what I'm thinking as well. Is that making the choice to shift into that awareness state, is you're gonna or into nature awareness like that, you're gonna slow down your beta frequencies, because your beta frequencies are focused more on processing and figuring something out. So if you're not doing that, if you're more in kind of an open observational state, you're gonna move slower. Your brainwave frequency is going to move slower. You're going to be able to pick up and become aware of more that's happening around you. And one of the things that's really fascinating to me about all this, and I think this is something I really learned from Tom, is that you are aware of more than you can comprehend at any given time. Like just because you are focused on something doesn't mean that your eyes aren't seeing everything else around you. It doesn't mean that your ears aren't hearing everything. It doesn't mean that you aren't making an internal map of your landscape. That all happens under the radar. That's all going on, regardless of where your attention is. So when you begin to open up to more of a nature connection, you're starting to drop into paying attention to more of what you are naturally tracking and observing in nature. And it's fascinating when you take that concept and apply that with self discovery.
Yeah.
Because if you understand and know how to um, collaborate with the environment to identify metaphors and symbols and messages for yourself that can help you interpret and answer questions that you have in your life, or gain insight into things, then if you know how to do that, and you also trust and realize that that person that you're working with or yourself is already aware of where those places are on the landscape, because you're already tapped in, you're already natural as a human being, you are already naturally tapped into the environment. You already know where things are. If you need to find water, you will find water. If you need to find food, you're going to figure out how to find food. Okay, and you're going to use all of the information that you've collected about your environment to be able to do that. All right. And that, and in some cases that might feel really natural, feel really fluid and natural. And, um, and you can use that same concept in this idea of collaborating with nature to help develop self-awareness, to heal, to grow, and so forth. Is if you generate that level of need, you will start to find the things that the answers that you're looking for. So it's this idea that all the answers are already there out on the landscape. All the answers are already within the client. So from a nature connected coaching standpoint, we're not telling anybody how to be. We're helping them discover how to be themselves. Does that make sense? and
Yeah.
they're using their relationship with nature to help them understand that a bit, to help understand themselves even more.
So using nature is going to lead to this self discovery. You're going to find some level of, being being more like yourself and where those roots are, and maybe giving them some more focus.
Yes, yeah, and you know it's hard not to use. I use the word use a lot too, but what I really mean is collaborate with.
Yeah.
Nature is a living thing, and you are nature, right? Your brain is nature, your body is nature, the environment that you're in. I mean, even the technology that we're using right now is generated on many different levels out of nature, from the genius that created it to the sand, soil, and water and sunlight that's in it all, right? I mean, so it's about this idea. Instead of use, it's around collaborating with something, and being able to help that client really identify what they already know inside. And nature, on that end, when you're in that state of collaboration, nature becomes a mirror. When you shift into that place that I was kind of referring to earlier, of nature connection and collaboration around your own personal discovery, you shift into a state that's very familiar um, to Gestalt psychotherapy, which you kind of move into this place where everything starts to have meaning around you, and your internal world then starts to become reflected on the landscape. It's mirrored back to you. So when you're working with somebody in that way, you're not just seeing the trees and the trail that they're walking down. You're actually you're seeing their internal landscape. They're processing their internal wilderness through their experience on the land. And being able to do that is around asking the right questions. It's around creating that context for somebody to step into nature in that way of real self discovery. How can I collaborate with this environment to learn more about this particular thing that's going on in my life?
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so that collaboration to learn that particular thing that's going on in life, and you're as a coach, are training people to ask specific questions or maybe use certain tools to kind of pave that connection.
Yes, yes. And this leads into something else that you brought up earlier, was around this idea of a wilderness quest. And
Yeah.
wilderness questing is an ancient, pan-cultural experience of going out into the solitude of wilderness for an extended amount of time to discover more in some way, to learn, to heal, to grow. And there's all sorts of different kind of quests that you could do. The more classic quest that most people are familiar with is like a vision quest, to be able to connect with purpose and direction. But you can also go and quest for healing. You can quest for other people's healings. You can quest for, personal direction and so forth. Okay, so all sorts of different ways that one might quest. But this idea of a quest and going into that space of interaction with nature like that is typically in not all the time, but kind of the classic model of that is a 4-day wilderness solo, where you are fasting from food, and you are fasting from many other aspects of your life. Okay, so fasting from technology. In fact, you try to bring as minimum stuff with you out on that experience. Like maybe it would just be a tarp that you would bring, and you're more exposed to the elements. You're more exposed to, what's going on in nature. And then fasting, of course, that's a whole nother subject right there of the physiology and the spirituality and so forth that's connected to fasting. But I mean, that's a huge part of this whole experience. Something people have been doing for forever, is that idea, or that process of fasting. But typically, those quests, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this highlights how you get somebody into this place of self discovery, and then instead of the person being solo on the quest, you're with them as the guide. Okay, so
Oh.
I'll kind of share that. All right, so with the quest, you've got three parts to this. You've got a kind of a beginning, which is really focused on preparation and organizing and setting a very clear intention for yourself. And then you've got what is that middle stage of this, which is typically that solo experience. Okay, where you are kind of leaving the old self behind and moving in to a place of unknown experience, so you can learn in an unfiltered kind of a way, right? So that beginning piece is really about trying to move beyond the old stories of our life, so you can go into a fresh new experience with a sense of openness and unknown. So much happens in the unknown. And you were mentioning Joe Dispenza, and he talks a ton about the power of the unknown in brain changes and changing self perceptions and so forth. So that going into that unknown, and then you've got your return on the other end of that, how you're going to take that experience and bring that back into your life, essentially, from the vision quest, how will you live your vision now, and everyone is always faced on that return, always faced with the fact that the old dynamics, the old patterns of life haven't changed. Just because you were out in the wilderness doing all this changing, all that hasn't changed. You've got to somehow take this new person and bring it in to the life that was already there, and integrate that in and start to invite um, a new way of interacting with your environment. And the so from the coaching perspective, we take that same idea with nature connected coaching, and we shrink that down into like an hour and a half long session. Okay, so we still go through this process of preparing somebody to go into an encounter with nature, and then learn from that encounter and bring that back into their life. And we use, all the competencies and tools of professional coaching and wilderness guiding and so forth to help us navigate through those different stages. But then when you're in that kind of unknown experiential encounter, then we start to tap into tools like Gestalt therapy and parts work and tracking and more interactive psychodrama, or role playing, or just more experiential, experimental type tools to help um, create more discovery, but also to really empower that new way of being. But practice it, rehearse it in a safe container, and then you have more in your toolbox. You got more resource when you go back into your day to day. Okay, so that's kind of the premise of how these things this coaching works and how that gets set up.
Yeah, Michael, that was a
Really
great
based
explanation.
off of and rooted in that concept of the wilderness quest, which is something that I've guided for many years. As long as I've had EVI, I've guided quests, and we still guide them,
Wow.
once or twice a year here through EVI. Yeah,
Wow, Michael, that's really
the
impressive. I think
ultimate
like
the ultimate experience.
It sure sounds like it. It sure sounds like it. I think one of the things that I love that you really, really hammered home was the integration back into a society that hasn't changed. The people around you haven't changed, but sure, you have absolutely changed. But how do you empower that change to continue on once you integrate? And whether it's being doing some role playing, some imaginary stuff to help them integrate. I love that you give them tools and resources for the integration, which I could see that being a place where people kind of maybe falter if they're not effectively trained.
Absolutely. And I'll say it's probably one of the downfalls of the whole transformational industry is the failure to help integration around change. One of the things that I really think about with this process is that, one, change can't happen unless the brain changes. Okay, like the brain has to change in order for you to experience change, and in order to change the brain on in a very permanent way requires a deep commitment to practicing that and changing that. And Joe Dispenza teaches that over and over. Right. So, but the other thing too is that we go to retreats, yoga retreats, or meditation retreats, or these powerful experiences that we have, and we think that something's changed in that. But really, what we're in that middle stage of that ceremony. We're in that kind of threshold experience where you're in the unknown. You've left behind your old life, and now you're in this new experience that you're having, and you have what's called an aha moment, or it's a peak experience. And I look at it as a peak, like a mountain peak, right? But also a peak into something. I remember reading that. I
Ah,
pulled that when I was in my graduate studies. I pulled that from Ken Wilber. I was studying Ken Wilber's work, and he often talked about the PEAK and the PEEK experience. And I love that because that's exactly what it is. It's like you get this peek into something, right? You see what's possible. You feel what's possible. But that's not transformation. That is not transformation. That's an opportunity. The transformation happens when you go back home.
yeah.
If your transformation is change, I'm going to change. I'm going to transform my life. That peak experience is the opportunity. Then it's your job. It's your commitment. It's your practice. It's your dedication to saying that is the person that I want to be now in my life. And now I'm going to integrate that into my life. I'm going to do whatever it takes to integrate that into my life because this is really who I am. and I,
Yeah.
and I think for the most part that gets overlooked, right? People are more addicted to the peak experience, and then they go home and they go, oh man, my life is back the way it was, so I got to go on another retreat, and I got to keep doing this over and over and over in order, or continue these processes that I'm doing, but they're not integrating it into their life. They're just continuing to have these peak experiences over and over. Now that's going to account for something, you know, but it is something that is absolutely essential. I think it's a disservice to your students, to your clients, to your participants to not help them incorporate that experience into their life. I mean, why would you create that opportunity for somebody in the first place if you didn't think it could change their life? You know? And so you got to help them integrate that into their life. And this is where one of the places where that's where how I started coaching, right? Was I saw that as a huge opportunity within the world of wilderness therapy. And wilderness therapy now does a pretty, they have quite a bit of that integrated into their programming now. But that's a big opportunity. I mean, I tell my students all the time, go partner up with like one of these high-end yoga retreats, or programs or organizations that are offering these, transformation retreats over and over and over, and say, hey, I'll make you guys look awesome by you letting me take some of your participants and helping them integrate that experience into their life. They'll be raving about how important it is for people to go to that program, because it changed their life. And here's how it changed my life. And here's how I integrated that back into my life. And here's how that affected my family. Here's how that affected, my community and my work and all of that kind of stuff. That's what the world needs, is that kind of healing, that kind of growth, that kind of commitment.
Yeah, Michael, I think the last word you said there, that commitment, that consistency, that practice is so important. And so one thing that I did not mention to you earlier during our pre-recording conversation, and I'm feeling so inspired right now, so I got to mention this. So my wife leads yoga retreats, and she actually has a couple coming up in the next year and a half. She's got one down in Costa Rica, one down in Panama, and you're absolutely correct. The commitment to long-term consistency and practice of, integrating that person that you want to be into your daily life. That is so
Yes.
important.
Yes. Yes. And, it's such a wonderful service that people are creating these retreats.
Yeah.
I mean, it gives people the opportunity to see what is truly possible in their lives, you know? But no matter what, like, even with the nature connected coaching and the amount of work that we put in around this incorporation or the questing or whatever it is, it's like that incorporation process always gets pinched a little bit. It's really
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
hard as a facilitator, as an organization, to make that happen and to create that, like to almost um, expect in some way or invite your participants to sign up for that. Like this process isn't actually over when you leave. It really just begins, right? So, here's how we're going to help you continue that. I think that's, you know, it's something that it always gets cut short. Even when I'm working with my clients, I find myself going, oh, geez, I only have 15 minutes to help them integrate that into their life now,
Yeah.
and I know I'm going to see them again, but I want, so you try to figure out like how can I take more time into that, because I think it's probably the most important piece. And if you can really help them identify why they're having this experience, on the front end of it, and really get super clear about that peak experience can happen really fast. That connection, you can have that in 5 minutes. And when you move into that kind of more experiential state, that can happen extremely fast. Um, and then you can have more space and more time to really help someone create a plan. And this is where, like, classic coaching really comes in, goals, plans, steps, actions, that kind of thing. But the difference between what we're doing with nature connected coaching and kind of your classic everyday coaching process is that we're not talking about, what is your to-do list. We're more interested in who is the person that's going to do that to-do list, right? Who is the new self that's going to do those
Mm.
things. So you're kind of, I got to remember to clean the closet and call this person and do all this kind of stuff. That's great. It's great to have those action items, but who's going to clean the closet, right? Is it going to be the same old person that cleaned the closet, 6 months ago? Or is it a new self, a new person? Is this going to be an opportunity for you to practice and integrate and bring this into your life, right? You're going to have that phone call with somebody. Who's going to be the one who's talking on the phone? Is it going to be the old patterns, the old self, or is this an opportunity to really practice? So that's a big difference. That's a big piece with the incorporation. It's not about an action item list. It's about a who you're going to be, a practice list, a rehearsal opportunities, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think those rehearsal opportunities are really important for who do you want to be and how and all these small little ways in life, right? Like cleaning your closet. How are you going to integrate it into that? So Michael, that's
Yeah.
is all really fantastic. I love it. And as I mentioned, I'm feeling very inspired. But I also want to take some time to kind of focus in on some of your services. And I know that you're
Yeah.
mostly training coaches and whatnot. And there's a lot to that. There's the
Yeah.
business aspect of it. There's learning all this great knowledge
Yeah.
that you've accumulated for decades. If you want to kind of go browse over that with kind of just some broad
Sure.
strokes of what that service looks like, especially for if
Yeah.
someone in the listening audience is feeling as inspired as me at the moment.
Yeah. Great. Well, yeah. So the main service really is our nature connected coaching certification training, like I mentioned before, which is accredited professional coach certification that is very focused on this idea of collaborating with nature. It's a very unique training. When I developed it, it was developed around nature connection, not it was, and then coaching kind of fit in around that rather than I'm going to create a coaching program. I was creating a guide program, and actually from nature connected coaching, our students can take the next step and become a transformational wilderness guide. And that then really is for folks who are looking to take their clients or groups into more of remote wilderness locations to have powerful personal change. The certification program is a year long, minimum a year long. It takes a year long to really get through it. It's 12 learning modules, and it's cohort based. So you go through it as a cohort. We do offer it online, entirely online, and also in person. Um, and that just includes so much mentoring. People come into that program with this idea of, I think I want to be a coach. I think I want to do this kind of work. I feel really connected to it. It calls me. I'm not quite sure what I want to do with this. And I think that over the years, I've discovered that this certification program is more about answering that question than anything else, helping people really get clear about what their vision is, what they're called to do with this kind of work. So we train them in how to do it, and how to be like a really powerful guide. Um, and and mentor them along the way. So there's tremendous amount of mentoring within the program. Every student has a mentor, a personal mentor who is paid to be your individual support, kind of
Wow.
coach slash academic advisor, slash a teacher's assistant in a way that is really helping you harness and lock into your personal and professional goals through the program. Um, so that's huge right there. And then we have business mentoring because you know our students come into this, and I would say 98, if not more percent of the program, of the students that come in, they want to have a career doing this. They're not just doing it for their own kind of self-discovery. They want to actually make a living doing this. And so we put a ton of focus on helping people with that and learning entrepreneurial skills. We call them soulpreneurial skills. For the most part, us nature people, and me included, don't have all this business training. I'm always like, wish that I had in college, did some business education, but that all happened, now I feel like I probably have a PhD in business development from running a business for this many years. But um, that is that's a huge piece of this, is helping students do so throughout the entire program. Our students are going to get business mentoring, that's in group and
Mm.
one-on-ones with me, but then up to a year postgraduate, that's also included in their tuition, that they're going to continue to get a year of business coaching and mentoring after that, because we want you to be successful. We want you to get clients, to make money, to do this, to have the impact that you want to have on the world. So there's that. Um, and and then, in addition to all that, um, we've got all sorts of ways for students to practice. So we've got ongoing practice groups that are happening where you can continue to practice your coaching skills and get feedback. A lot of direct feedback. Everything is very experiential learning. There's lectures, of course, but it's all like, let's get your hands into this and really understand it, really practice it, get a lot of direct feedback from instructors and mentors. um, and then we have, so that's the Nature Connected Coaching Certification Program. Of course, there's a lot more to it. Um, and then we also have another training program that we're really excited about. We started launching this a couple of years ago. It's Nature Connected Leadership. So if you think of Nature Connected Coaching as people who are really inspired to help other people discover their purpose and vision in the world, Nature Connected Leadership is about discovering that for yourself and learning and becoming an inspiration to others. So not necessarily I'm going to coach and guide others, but I want to be more of an inspiration to my teams, to the people to my family, um, to my work environment, that kind of thing. I want to have more of an impact in the world and on my communities, and so that's Nature Connected Leadership. And that is starts off, it's kind of a couple of different levels to it, but it starts off with um, a 7-week training. And both of those courses are actually coming up this fall. So in September, we are starting a new cohort through Nature Connected Leadership. And in October, we're starting a new cohort within Nature Connected Coaching. Um, And so we also have all sorts of different programs that we offer in addition to the current students, development type programs and refresher programs and so forth. Um, and we offer the wilderness quests. Like I mentioned, that's something that happens a couple times a year. And we do offer one-on-one individual coaching too. So that's
Wow.
the bulk of the services that we offer. Um, and yeah, thanks for asking.
Well, Michael, it's very palpable how much you care about seeing people's success. It is extremely palpable, and I love that you're so committed to that. That for the nature connected coaching, you offer up to a year of postgraduate mentoring and whatnot. The way that you design your curriculum to be more hands-on, where they're rehearsing, they're practicing, and kind of that applicatory type of approach to education versus lecturing. Lecturing, it has an effect to a degree, but that applicatory type of education where people are using their new knowledge, they're applying their new knowledge, and then they're getting critiqued to develop their skills. That is something
Yeah.
that's so important. That's how a lot of my education was going through the PhD and my master's degree, was doing research and getting critiqued, and then you optimize more and more,
Yeah.
and you get better and better at it. And so it's great, everything that you mentioned. I was really fascinated with. And with the nature connected leadership, what type of people are typically drawn to that the most? Are they certain types of
Yeah.
professionals?
Um, that's who we are, targeting and marketing to is more are folks that are professionals, but it also does bring in, people who are in like some kind of transition change, like, career change of some kind. Um, it could be a more of a personal life change where now I'm starting to reevaluate what I'm doing and what I really care about. And but it's always from that lens of leadership rather than, I mean, it is this personal transformation type of training, but it's more focused on where you're going to go with this versus, let's help you unpack some of these changes that are going on in your life. So really around, connecting deeply to nature and yourself, and starting to really tune into vision and direction and creating something from that. We really want the students to create something, a way, an opportunity to bring themselves more into the world. whatever that looks like. It could be, um, doing something with your kids differently, or it could be inviting the team of people that you're managing and working with, um, to interact with nature, interact in a new way that inspires them to be more connected to their direction, more connected to their purpose in the world.
Yeah, and yeah, I think being more connected to their purpose is going to strengthen their relationships, and they're going to see that. Yeah, that's amazing. So if people want to look up EBI, their Earth Based Institute, where do they find more information?
Earthbasedinstitute.org.
Okay, nice. And is there a hyphen in there, or anything like
Yeah.
that?
Nope. It's just all one word.
Okay, so
Yep.
www.earthbasedinstitute.com.
.org.
.org, sorry.
Yeah.
www.earthbasedinstitute.org.
You'd end up there. You'd end up there with .com, but it's .org.
Okay, okay. Gosh, Michael, is there any last concluding thoughts that you'd like to share with the listening audience, or have we kind of hit everything?
Oh, geez. I mean, you could tell that I could talk for hours, right? But
You know your stuff.
no,
You're
I
great.
really appreciate it. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've been a fantastic guest. Your level of knowledge is very, very expansive. And so it was fantastic to hear your explanations and to learn more about the Earth Based Institute. I've already said it, I think, 3 times on this episode, but I'm feeling very inspired. So thank you for passing that to me and energizing me. It's been great. And I also will repeat myself again. Your sincerity and just interest of wanting to help people is very palpable. And I think that's really fantastic.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. I'm going to put on the outro music and we'll call it an episode.
All right.